Yemen is a country that today might not look like much to most that only view it on a map. However, the land of Yemen has been home to many very old civilizations and cities. The one city we are going to look at today is the city of Sanaa, the current capital of Yemen, and what the city and its pre-Islamic history tells us about the pre-Islamic Arabic peninsula. Mythologically, Sanaa was founded at the base of the mountain of Jabal Nukn by Shem, Noah's first son, after Noah's death. However, that is in the realm of myth. Archaeologically and historically, what is known is that the area was settled from the early Bronze Age, several thousands of years BC, and the area was part of early civilizations which rival the early other civilizations of the Middle East, such as the early cities in Mesopotamia and early Egyptian civilization, in being among the first civilizations on Earth. And the city of Sanaa itself can at least be considered a city for more than 2,500 years in the oldest parts of it. And it was either built by an old South Semitic Arabic people called the Sabaeans, or later was taken over by them in the first millennium BC. The Sabaeans spoke a language that is distantly related to Arabic, Sabaic, as it is a South Semitic language, and Arabic is a Central Semitic language, closer to Hebrew in certain ways. And the name of the city, Sanaa, is derived from the South Arabic Sabaic root of Sad, Nun, Ain and Waw, Sanaa, that later got simplified into Sad, Nun and Ain into its current form of Sanaa. The meaning of the name in Sabaic was fortified, because the city functioned as a fortress, as a fortified city that overlooked the vital trade routes that were taking up north and down south, the wares and goods that were coming from and to the Ethiopic-Yemeni-Indian trade network, a sea trading network that was enormous in scale and connected Africa and India with the Arabic Peninsula, which in turn connected to the greater Middle East through various land trade routes. And Sanaa was located in the middle of these trade routes as a stopgap and trading station inland, before moving further north or further south along the trade routes. Because of its central location, Sanaa served as an urban hub for the surrounding tribes of the region to gather to, and as a nucleus of regional trade in Yemen and the rest of southern Arabia, and became a rather large city that was of vital importance, not just as a trade station, but as a production center as well. In pre-Islamic times, Sanaa was not only a stopgap on a trading route, but also from the beginning had a mining industry. The hills around Sanaa were mined for precious stones and minerals such as onyx, chalcedony and cornelian, especially cornelian, or as it's called in Arabic, aqiq, of high quality and high refinement, made the city of Sanaa famous for its production. And there exists poetry about al-aqiq as-Sanai of Yemeni, the Sanaa cornelian stone, or the Yemeni cornelian stone, as a symbol for something precious and important to keep, and for something shiny and filled with light. However, precious stones were not the only thing that were mined. Also other metals were mined in the area. And Sanaa was also famous for its production of high-skilled weapons and metal objects of high quality. Sanaa can thus be viewed as a production center, as much as a trading hub. In fact, it can be viewed as a production center, so much so that the shortened route for Sanaa, Sad, Nun and Ain became connected to trades and crafts in Quranic Arabic. Sanaa means he produced in Arabic. So Sanaa was a center of production of various goods and an important city, even long before the advent of Islam. With regards to weapons and metal objects of high quality, it should be remembered that the trading Arabs that recognized the production and quality in Sanaa had traveled far and wide up the northern parts of the Middle East, such as into the Eastern Roman Empire and Persia also, and not only down into the south of Yemen. and thus they had visited often the greatest empires at that time, the greatest civilizations. So they had very fine other examples to compare quality and production to. So it is impressive that Sanaa could be compared favorably to the best of those civilizations. And something that might have been even more impressive were the buildings in Sanaa by this time, such as the Ghumdaan Palace or Qasr al-Ghumdaan, a large palace that was built like a large tower with adjoined buildings, described both in ancient Arabic poetry and in historical works, as a multi-story tower with each story being built from stone of a different color, and as having been about 20 stories high and about 100 meters in height, though more reasonable estimates place it about 10 stories in height, which is about 50 meters. As the palace was destroyed in the 7th century, only the foundations remain, and most have been covered up by later buildings. However, the size of the entire area of the palace is around 500 by 300 meters. This, together with the rather impressive height of the main tower, makes it the tallest castle or palace known to the ancient world, of between 50 to 100 meters. And possibly also the largest, and that is when you compare this palace to the largest palaces found in the Roman Empire, in Persia and in China and India during the time right before the time of Muhammad, during the 6th and 7th centuries. I could make an entire video about this building, and I might do it in the future. But for now, let's go to the other type of impressive buildings found in Sanaa even in the time before Islam. Sanaa's old city is today renowned for its tower houses, which are typically built from stone, fried bricks and mud. Some of these houses can reach up to 8 stories in height, and there exists archaeological and historic evidence that these sorts of buildings were built even far before the time of Islam. Due to the nature of these mud brick houses, it is almost impossible to date them precisely. Yet we know for certain archaeological fact that the 9th century in the near post-Islamic period had them, and there exist some indications that they could have existed even back in BC time, and there are historical documents that describe them as existing in the period before Islam. In Sanaa, multi-storied living buildings, even if not of the same type, but as a concept, are also not unique to the Yemeni area, as some other high civilizations, such as the Romans, had built them too. If these multi-storied buildings were present around the time of the 1st century, this would make Sanaa one of the very first cities in the world to have multi-story housing, something that pretty much only very large Roman cities in the Roman Empire, such as Rome, also had during this time. Though about these multi-story buildings, they are not entirely unique to Sanaa, as you can see the same type of buildings in the city of Shibam and in some other cities in Yemen too. Maybe the most fascinating thing about these high buildings is the need that drove people to build these high buildings in the first place. And the only reasonable need that I can see that would drive people to build these sorts of buildings is that it was a question of space, as it's more efficient to build higher buildings if there is a need to live within a confined area, which only truly becomes the case when there are high populations in a city and space saving becomes important. There is not any exact numbers of the population of Sanaa until after the coming of Islam, but it ought to have been very high for its time. And based upon the areas of Old Sanaa and the potential housing density of these tall buildings, even with very modest estimations, based upon methods for calculating population size of ancient Roman cities, the population at the lowest estimates are several tens of thousands, just below 100,000, and the higher ones are in the hundreds of thousands. This would also fit with certain descriptions about Sanaa as an historic city, as big as the other great cities of the Middle East. The building of these tall buildings, combined with the potentially very large population size, shows a great willingness of the people living there to actually live in a rather crowded place due to the economic activity found there. And this is very important to note, since Sanaa was not and is not a coastal city, which is usually the case for large trading cities, as they are trading ports, but a city in the mountains, meaning it should have had a disadvantage when it comes to large-scale settlement due to commercial traffic, as trade across land is usually far less lucrative than sea trade, and thus far less likely to attract a large amount of economic activity and thus a large amount of people to gain from it. That pre-Islamic Sanaa managed to get this big, just like the cities along the South Arabian coast, despite not being a coastal city, points towards the richness of the area that can only come from a very intensive type of trade that went across land, and a trade that continued up north, and that other cities further up north, such as Mecca and Medina, Taima and Tabuk, also were a part of. These and other cities were part of trade routes that connected sub-Saharan Africa and India with North Saharan Africa and the northern Middle East across land, a trade that ought to have followed through the entire peninsula, creating great economic prosperity through the trade. If the greatness of pre-Islamic Sanaa is any indication of it, then the Arabic peninsula was far richer than most would imagine, and this richness would fuel the conquests that were started by one man involved in this trade. A man from Mecca, a merchant turned messenger of God that would upend the world order permanently, but that is a part of history for another time. Sanaa in pre-Islamic times was an ancient and advanced city, with multi-story housing, metal production and refinement of that metal that rivaled the best of some of the world's greatest empires could offer. A part of a trade network that connected civilizations and brought great richness, and ultimately an example of how the Arabic peninsula was far more advanced and richer than most would believe, even before the time of Islam. As for after Islam, Sanaa would remain one of the most important cities of the Middle East, and arguably become even more important. But also that will be a history for another time. Please do subscribe, as it would help the channel spread awareness about the humanities.
اشتركوا بالقناة من فضلكم.